This image right here tells a very dramatic story. At first glance, it might not mean much to you, but believe me, there is a lot to uncover from this. Blizzard has released the official Diablo 4 Season 1 stats corresponding to the first week. They clearly show the game's current flaws and honestly, how bad the situation really is. Join me as I take a deeper look at these numbers and understand what they truly represent. Hope you enjoy. First, let's start by analyzing the amount of seasonal characters created. 7.1 million in total. Keep in mind that the game has sold around 10 million copies on release and likely an extra 2 or 3 million afterwards. So how come more than 10 million people paid for the game and then decided that it was not worth playing it on its first season? This right here is the clearest sign of how bad the current state of the game is. If you pay a minimum of $70 for a game and then you can't feel motivated enough to even create a character in it, then there must be something very wrong with the game itself. And I'm not talking about a few people, we are talking about millions. It might not sound like it, but I am actually trying to be an optimist about this metric by assuming that Blizzard is not counting multiple seasonal characters on the same account, which is what it seems to be since they just wrote seasonal characters created. So if that is the case, then we can safely say that out of the 10 to maybe 13 million people who bought the game, probably only 3 million, if that, actually felt the interest to at least give the first season a try. Now let's move on to the next issue. 831 million malignant monsters have been slain, but only 236 million malignant hearts have been caged. This one is pretty self-explanatory, the mechanic is just terribly designed, it makes no sense whatsoever to have to click the spawned orb after killing a monster, and then standing there for 10 seconds waiting for the actual elite that only then will drop the desired caged heart to spawn. It just makes no sense, and as we can see, nobody has got time for that. So people are just ignoring this mechanic altogether. Only about 1 in every 4 hearts is caged. This should be a clear sign for Blizzard to stop time syncing our gameplay. Diablo used to be one of the most fun games in the world. You could just log in and go on a rampage slaying hordes of monsters non-stop on what was an amazingly entertaining and stress-free experience. I have heard that someone actually kept track of how much time we spend interacting with the game as it should logically be played, and how much time is wasted on ridiculous time-syncing mechanics. By this, I mean backtracking in dungeons, mounting up cooldowns after using a ladder, for example, the fact that using a nightmare dungeon key does not immediately send you into the dungeon, just so that you have to get extra loading screens, and then face the same issue at the end of it, where you cannot just use another key and get right into the next dungeon immediately. This makes it so that you have to either teleport out of the dungeon or straight into town, and only then use the next key to the dungeon's entrance, and finally, again, enter the dungeon. It takes you 3 loading screens to get into the next dungeon. This is insane. There is no excuse for such a mechanic whatsoever. I went a bit off track here, as you can see, I'm not happy with this. So to sum it up, the guy that kept track of all these time syncing mechanics realized that the average player spends about 70% of its Diablo 4 playtime not actually playing the game, but going through this nonsense. Which means that we spend only 30% of our time actually fighting the forces of hell as advertised. I have not measured this myself, but I trust this ratio as it reflects what I feel as I'm playing the game. Next concern is that only 7,772 characters have actually reached level 100. The game has no endgame content other than slaying Lilith at level 100, which means that your journey from the moment you unlock World Tier 4 at around, let's say, level 65 up until you reach level 135 levels later is actually a giant time sink just so that you can actually go face Lilith and be done with the game. Because yes, there is nothing else to do after you beat Lilith. There are no leaderboards to push towards to, and there won't be any until next year as Blizzard has already confirmed. So your sole motivation to level past unlocking tier 4 is a single boss encounter, and that is it. And if you want to tell yourself that those 35 levels of pure boredom are practice or some other sort of preparation for the Lilith fight, well, chances are that your beloved build that you spent all those days playing with won't actually be the one you will be using to beat Lilith. So you will be forced into a build that you do not enjoy just for one boss fight, to then put the game aside in order to wait for the next season and do it all over again. I am aware that they have added 2 new bosses to the game in order to give you something extra to look forward to throughout your journey, but come on guys, who cares about those? I guess it is up to personal taste and opinion, but I for one am realizing how big of a scam Diablo 4 was. If you don't know, Diablo 4 is the all-time Blizzard game bestseller, with $666 million made on release. However, the game is pretty much a beta, clearly unfinished, full of bugs and exploits, and I am still seeing plenty of people complaining of VRAM syncing reports on some graphics cards, so even the game structure is badly built. $666 million plus, and leaderboards, which is something that 99.9% of the community deeply desires, cannot be done until next year. I wonder how expensive it can be to apply a system that they already have on Diablo 3 and has been working fine for many years to this new, incredibly similar game. Greed has its limits, and Activision Blizzard seems to be getting greedier and greedier each year, investing less and less into their games and constantly lying to their community. A multi-billion-dollar company on an indie company's budget, with little to no respect for the consumer. I would not be surprised if the vast majority of their investment on Diablo 4 was actually spent on deceitful marketing. Because one thing we know for sure is that it was not spent in the game. Of course, unless the devs who are calling the shots are on a millionaire salary, which, to be honest, I would not be surprised about either. Anyway, let's hope that the transition into Microsoft takes place as fast as possible. Maybe there is still hope for Blizzard's future. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you haven't yet, and as always, I will see you in the next one.